Before Dragon Ball FighterZ, before Dragon Ball Z Budokai, there was a little fighting game series called Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden. These were the first Dragon Ball fighting games to exist. They mostly came out in Japan and Europe only, so it's possible that this is the first time many of you are watching them. But today we're gonna review all of them. All of the old school Dragon Ball fighting games, the genre that always made the most sense for this series. A total of 6 games will be reviewed and ranked as I played every single one of them to completion in the last couple of months. Welcome to the second episode of the ranking of Dragon Ball games. Let's kick off this episode with Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden, released only in Japan, France, and Spain. It did eventually make it worldwide as a pre-order bonus for Dragon Ball FighterZ on Switch. If you've missed that pre-order though, tough luck. It's not for sale anymore. Now, I respect this game a lot for being the first Dragon Ball fighting game, but my god, it's bad. The game feels very stiff, incredibly clunky, and overall not very fun to learn. You have a punch, a kick, and a key blast button. The game has traditional motion inputs for specials and supers, and there's also a button to fly, so you can fight on the ground and in the air. You can only fly if you're far away from the opponent, causing the screen to split, but the game completely freezes for a long time whenever someone flies, which can throw you off and make your inputs not work. But even when players aren't flying, I feel like motions don't work most of the time. There's a lot of little things that pause the game, so if you're doing a quarter circle or a half circle motion, it might just get interrupted in the middle of it and the game is not gonna buffer that input. It's just gonna drop it. When you're far away, you can launch the strongest attacks your characters have, and a mini game will start where the opponent can do a full motion to block, reflect, or completely dodge the attack. The problem is there's a very tight window to pull off any of these options, so often it just feels like it doesn't work as it should. You can also charge your ki, which is required for these super attacks, but only while you're flying. And there's pretty much no animation for it, and also your ki charges incredibly slowly, so this ends up being kind of a useless mechanic. The best way to build up ki is simply to block your opponent's attacks. I think each character has a decent number of moves and good move variety too, even if some of them feel like duplicates. Vegeta and Gohan both have a flurry of punches, there are a bunch of sliding moves, dive kicks, but for a first attempt, there's good character variety here. Even if a lot of these flurry attacks don't actually combo. Like, you can get punched in the middle of this. A lot of frame data doesn't make any sense. In fact, from my time with the game, I think block stun is actually higher if you are blocking and mash the attack button as soon as possible, making certain attacks very hard to punish. But on the other hand, if you do a special move while blocking, all the block stun is gone. It's a very weird mechanic. But it's got a decent sized roster too, at 12 characters. I mean, technically 13, but Super Vegeta is really just a skin. And this is actually the biggest roster that we're gonna have for a while. All the sequels had less characters, which is not what you would expect. Story mode takes you through the fights of Dragon Ball Z up to the Cell Saga. There's a secret ending if you play it on the max difficulty where you can pick Mr. Satan. He gets beat up and then he has a bellyache. It's good stuff. Very funny. There are no saves, you can't even return to the main menu after playing the story, so you gotta reset the console, meaning if you want to unlock everything, you gotta do it with the cheat code. And finally, I absolutely love the sprite work. I think these characters look great, and the soundtrack is an absolute banger. That Vegeta theme goes really hard. It's a bit light on content, which would be fine for a fighting game, but since the fighting itself isn't the best, I'm gonna have to rank this pretty low. You could say, well, that's just how fighting games were back then, cut it some slack. But this came out on the same year as Mortal Kombat 2, Samurai Showdown, and Super Street Fighter 2, so I don't think I need to cut it some slack. E rank, below the other 2 games from the first episode, and for this episode, we're gonna mark these games with the announcer logo, because, you know, fighting games. 1 down and 5 to go, it's time to move on to Super Butoden 2. Once again, this wasn't released in North America until 2015, and that was as a pre-order bonus for Extreme Butoden on the 3DS. And here's the good thing about putting all of these games in the same episode, I don't have to go through all the basics again, because this plays very similar. It does feel much smoother, the movement feels better, your special move inputs actually work this time around, proving that I wasn't crazy, I'm not that bad at fighting games, god. The window for countering supers is much better, and now you can counter a super with your own super, meaning beam clashes. You can now key charge anywhere, not just while flying anymore, and the key charge actually comes with its own animation, and you charge a lot more, so this move is actually useful now. You've got more specials and supers for all the characters, so they feel a bit more complete, but the biggest upgrade was how much freedom they gave players with the sequel, with the same fighting system they had before. It doesn't feel as clunky anymore, you can TK motions, so you can do crazy stuff like this. As soon as you leave the ground, yes, this is that game game from that famous Piccolo Vortex video, and it makes the whole game feel broken as hell. And it is broken as hell, but it's so much more fun this way. The roster was downgraded from 12 to only 10 characters, and they've got some really odd choices here, like Cell Jr., Bojack, Zangia. Also, Broly is playable for the first time. This might actually be one of the few Dragon Ball games in history without Frieza. There were, however, a couple of things that I didn't like as much as the first game. Number one, they put foregrounds in some of the stages. Environment that obstructs your view is always an odd choice. And in story mode, instead of you being able to pick different characters for different fights, you just pick one and play through the whole thing with them. Now, this would be fine if the story mode was different for every character, but it's the same story mode. I mean, there might be some slight dialogue changes here and there, but you go through the same arcs. Story mode is a bigger adventure focus this time around, though. There's dialogue and choices. There's a whole section where you visit different parts of the world to find the Dragon Balls. It shows that they're putting some effort into story mode, and that's always appreciated. If you beat the story on hard, you've got a secret boss fight against Broly, so it even has a secret fight just like the first game. Much more fluid, but still kind of a simple fighting game, and the odd roster is really the thing that sticks out the most to me, but it's also the kind of game that is so broken that you can definitely come up with creative ways to beat your opponent. Even if it's not balanced, it's a ton of fun. Way better than the first game. We're gonna put it on D rank, meaning it's right now the best Dragon Ball game of all time, at least so far. Let's move on, and up next we have Buyu Retsuden. Now, I may have some personal bias on this one because this was my first Dragon Ball game and I played it a lot as a kid. That said, I often come back to these games and I'm very disappointed because what I'm playing is definitely not what I remember, but that was really not the case with Buyu Retsuden. Despite not having Butoden in its name, it's still definitely a Super Butoden game, this time on the Mega Drive, as it didn't come out in North America, so it's definitely not the Sega Genesis. This game feels even better than Super Butoden 2 without feeling completely broken, so it's by far the most competent fighting game we've had today. You can play the whole thing in two modes. You can just boot up the game and play it normally, or you can play using my favorite feature, Turbo Mode. By holding some buttons on the title screen, you can speed the whole thing up, and this game feels so much better when it's faster. They added some new mechanics too. You can now fly away from your opponent even if you are close to them. If two players dash into each other, that dashes will collide, and you will go into sort of a throw situation. You have less options for countering supers, but honestly that was much appreciated because you still have everything you'd want, including a new option to fly away from a super. The roster has 11 characters, with Recoome and Ginyu joining for the first time ever, but it's honestly a very solid roster compared to the previous ones. I don't see any odd choices here. Now, the game does have its downsides compared to the Super Nintendo games. First of all, I like the sprites in the Super Nintendo games better. It might be personal preference, but I think the game looks a bit uglier than before. The stages look great. Maybe it's just the characters themselves. Also, you don't have a lot of buttons on a Mega Drive, so all you can do is punch, kick, and fly away, which means most of the characters' move list is huge because even something as simple as throwing a key blast is going to require a motion input. And they did something they definitely shouldn't have done, which was to completely remove throws from the game. They're just not there. It's a fighting game without throws. And story mode is, well, interesting. You choose a character for story mode and play through a series of battles and get an ending for that character, kind of like an arcade mode. Thing is, some characters don't have a story, and it's not the ones you'd expect. Goku, Gohan, and Trunks just have no story. You just jump straight into a fight, and once you reach the end, the character might say something. Gohan, for instance, says, "To be honest, I don't like to fight." After doing all those battles, I mean, you could have just told us earlier, Gohan. And Goku just says, "Well played." Other characters do have an intro cutscene that gives you some context to all the fights you're about to have, but this is a weird timeline. Let's look at Cell's story. Cell has been revived after the Cell games, and he's very angry. So his story ends with him destroying the planet. Krillin needs to hurry up because Android 18 is about to be absorbed by Cell. So what the hell are you doing on Namek? Recoome single-handedly kills everyone on Earth. When Frieza gets there, the Earth is empty. There is only Recoome. So Frieza just moves on to the next planet. There's not much else to it. There is an excellent Easter egg. If you go to a CPU versus CPU battle and pause the game for 6 minutes, bubbles will come on screen. And I've never seen this anywhere on YouTube. I wasn't even sure it was gonna happen when I streamed this game, so I really popped off when I saw bubbles. For me, this was the best Butoden. Maybe because it was the only one on Mega Drive they put in the extra effort, not knowing if they were ever gonna make a sequel. But it's got the best roster by far. It plays smoothly, especially if turbo mode is enabled, but it's still at its core a fairly basic fighting game, especially since you pretty much only have 2 buttons now, so let's not go crazy with the score. I'm gonna rank it above Super Butoden 2 at D rank, making it the new best Dragon Ball game of all time, or at least so far. Let's move on to the next game. Super Butoden 3. It wasn't easy for me to go from the Mega Drive back to the Super Nintendo because once again Super Butoden 3 felt kinda stiff. They did keep some of the options from Buyuretsuden, like being able to fly away when you're close to your opponent, but it's definitely a downgrade from our previous game, and that becomes very obvious when you look at the roster. Only 10 characters total, and it's such an odd roster at that. Lots of first timers: Goten, Trunks, Adult Gohan, Supreme Kai, Dabura, Majin Buu, and Majin Vegeta. But if you ask me, this looks like a roster made by someone who rushed the game out as soon as the Buu saga started. Otherwise, we'd see Super Buu, Kid Buu, Super Saiyan 3, Gotenks, Vegito, you know, the characters that define that arc. Also, you may notice that we only have 9 characters right now, and that's because one of them is a secret character that you unlock with a cheat code. And that character is Future Trunks. Yeah, not even a new character, it's just Future Trunks, and his moveset was slightly adjusted, but it's honestly not that different from before. The movesets for each character now feel super small compared to Buyuretsuden. Granted, that game needed a lot of motions because it had one less button, but they removed so many abilities for each character that they now just feel incomplete. And they also have completely removed story mode, so all you got is versus matches and tournament mode, so it also feels super light on content. This feels like a rushed game, released way too early into the Buu saga. It's very similar to Super Butoden 2, just with a worse roster in my opinion. And Super Butoden 2 at least had a story mode, so content-wise, this is also suffering. Even if overall Butoden 3 has a better fighting system thanks to its features that it borrows from Buyuretsuden, I still have to rank it below Butoden 2. In fact, for the lack of features, I'm gonna put it at the top of E rank for now, but we'll see how long it stays there. After Butoden 3, it was time to change console once again, and so Dragon Ball got its first game on PlayStation, Ultimate Battle 22. Unless you lived in America, in which case the first game on PlayStation was Final Bout, but that's for a future episode. Ultimate Battle 22 is still a Butoden game at its core. It does play a bit smoother than the Super Nintendo games, and it had several changes. First of all, the split screen is completely gone. The camera now zooms out when the players get some distance or fly away. Although the flying makes some characters look really big by comparison, the scale looks off. They reused a lot of songs from their previous Butoden soundtracks, but they've all been rearranged, and I cannot have enough of this Piccolo theme. It is so good. This game features one of the biggest fighting game rosters for a Dragon Ball game ever, with 22 characters total, hence the name, Ultimate Battle 22. But then there's 5 more if you enter a cheat code, making this Ultimate Battle 27? That said, this is the single worst character select screen I've ever navigated. Let's go to Master Roshi down there. So we go to Gohan, press down and no, okay, go down to Roshi, maybe to the right, no, that goes to Krillin, maybe from the left, I'm exhausted now. Okay, give me Mr. Satan, let's go down from Gotenks, and are you serious? I'm just pressing down, it keeps cycling like this. Why? Maybe go through Goten? Yeah, there you go. Because this roster is gigantic, they made a lot of new movesets, and it's pretty varied, but it's definitely not a game to be taken seriously. It's completely out of balance. Cinematic supers are gone now, so the game doesn't stop for you to play the little minigame anymore, which makes battles slightly less cinematic in a way, but they did upgrade the animation for meteor attacks. Everyone has their own unique meteor, and they're really cool looking, even if the game overall looks pretty rough. You can tell they tried to upgrade their look to 3D, but damn, it looks worse than the previous Butoden sprites. I really don't like the look of any of this. Content-wise, this game is pretty thin too. No story mode once again. The closest thing you have is just beating all the 22 characters if you want to see the credits roll. That's it. And there's another mode called Build-Up Mode in case you want to level up your characters. That's right, leveling up characters in a fighting game. This will give them more health and damage, sort of like an RPG where all you do is grind. Just pick an opponent, beat them, and you level up. Why would you do this? So you can battle with leveled up characters. Yeah, I don't get it either. You could later port these characters to Final Bout, though Final Bout didn't have a lot of the characters in this roster, so that portability was somewhat limited. There's also a tournament mode, but even if you're playing by yourself, you need 2 controllers. Because if your character lands on the player 2 spot, you cannot control it with a player 1 controller. What the hell? So yeah, a bit thin on content despite the big roster. As far as secrets and Easter eggs go, well, first of all, we've got some characters as trademarks. Others are just registered. It's always jarring to see in a video game. If you have a Kid Goku mirror match, by the end of it, the loser will turn to Oolong, revealing itself to be an imposter, and that's pretty fun. And Vegito is in this game. He's kind of underwhelming for what's supposed to be the most powerful character in this roster. I'm not a big fan of his moveset. And I can see you typing your little comment already. That's not Vegito. Oh my god, I can't believe you don't know the difference between Vegito and Gogeta. No, that is Vegito. Look at his name. Also, they fused with earrings during the intro cutscene, so if you've got a problem, take it up with Bandai. I went to read how people reacted to this game back when it came out, and they had pretty much the same complaints as I did. And even though I think it is technically a better playing game than Buyur Buretsu, then I am gonna rank this below it at D rank. Because if you don't have a story mode, your fighting game needs to at least be balanced and not look as ugly as it does. And now it's time for the final game in this episode. We're going back to the Super Nintendo for what is a wildly different game, Hyper Dimension. Technically, still counts as a Butoden, but it could have fooled me. We're back on the Super Nintendo, which means a smaller roster, 10 characters only, but these characters make a lot more sense than the roster in Butoden 3. Gotenks, Vegito, Kid Buu, now these are the stars of the Buu saga. For the first time ever, you can actually do combos. I mean, you could do some combos before, but it was kind of jank. This game actually has normals into special cancels, it has juggles, it has a combo system. And do you remember how you could do a special move while in block stun to just remove all the block stun away ever since the first Butoden? Well, I was never sure that was the case, but this kind of confirmed it. Because now they actually made a mechanic out of it. They made it intentional. There's a visual cue, the game freezes when you do it, and it is still absolutely broken, but at least now it's broken on purpose. This basically means there's no block pressure in this game, and every character also has this 3D move where they jump into the background and then they attack you. This move is incredibly powerful, and a lot of this game revolves around this feature because this dodges attacks, it's plus on block, and approaches the opponent from so far away. It's basically super dash times 100. This new fighting system also has a few weird choices though. First of all, the way health and meter are shared. The number at the top is your meter, but it's actually your health too. The health bar only starts depleting once that number gets low enough, which means that if you charge your meter, you're actually healing yourself too. And this game has a big focus on stage transitions. Look at this stage select. That stage in the middle, all of those stages combined, that's one stage. By doing certain motions, you can send your opponent flying into the next screen, and some of them don't have a floor, which means you will fight while flying. And the flying fighting sucks so much. It's awful to fight in these flight stages. In fact, whenever a stage doesn't have certain transitions, you can use those stage transition moves to just do combos. It's so much better when you cannot transition into a flying stage. Anyway, at this point you've probably noticed that all the sprites have been redone in a new style. The animations in this game are so much richer than before, and that also shows in these insane meteor attacks, which was one of the features that came over from the previous Butoden games. In addition to that, I think this has the best story mode we've seen in this episode. You go through the Dragon Ball Z story, and some fights are so hard that you're actually meant to lose them, like Piccolo versus Frieza, for example. But if you somehow play out of your mind, they actually wrote some alternate text to take you into the next fight. And it's never like, well, you won in the game, but we're gonna make you lose in the cutscene or in the text. No, they come up with a creative way. Piccolo beat Frieza, and now Frieza's really angry, so he's gonna blow up the planet. So Piccolo grabs Gohan and gets out of there, leaving it up to Goku. It still goes into the Goku versus Frieza fight, but they find some creative ways to turn the story around if you actually win where you were supposed to lose. Towards the end, story mode does drag a bit by having you fight against Kid Buu over and over, but if you make it all the way through without using any continues, you have 3 bonus boss fights. I'm pretty sure Gotenks went AFK in one of them, so that one was easy. And absolutely nothing could have prepared me for the fight against Vegito. He is absolutely cracked out of his mind. This was the hardest boss fight in a Dragon Ball game so far. Actually, scratch that. It's still Master Roshi from the previous episode. That was just unfair. I'd say overall, it's a better fighting game than the previous ones, but it did have some bad choices with the few systems they added. It definitely has a lot more complexity, and it's kind of fun to learn each character. With the best story mode we've had so far, I have no choice but to rank this above everything else at C rank, making Hyper Dimension the best Dragon Ball game of all time, or at least so far. And that's episode 2 of the ranking. I hope this was worth the wait. 6 full games have been added today, so we've got 8 Dragon Ball games in total right now. I'm not exactly sure what I'm ranking next, but I know for sure I am taking a break from fighting games for the next episode. This was fun, but it was also a lot. If there's a game you'd like to see in the next episode though, make sure to let me know in the comments down below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. My name is Globku, and I'll see you next time. Bye!